Welcome to HardScript.
Help me reach 5,000 subscribers. Support the video with a like and leave your thoughts in the comments. I came home to find her laptop open on the kitchen counter, a half-finished Starbucks cup sweating beside it. The screen showed a LinkedIn message thread, long, polished paragraphs about career growth, strategic mentorship, and late-night brainstorming sessions. His name was Richard Langford, the new vice president of business development. Married, older, charming in that corporate way. The kind of man who thought eye contact was a form of power. My name's Ethan Cole. I'm 38 years old, electrical systems engineer at a mid-sized manufacturing company in Atlanta. I build things that work quietly, predictably, efficiently. My wife, Megan, thrives on noise. Marketing director, always presenting, always performing. For 8 years, our worlds had coexisted like two different operating systems, compatible enough to function, but never truly synchronized. That night, I read the messages. They weren't romantic. That made it worse. They were tactical. Her asking how to position herself during the upcoming restructure. Him replying that leadership noticed her potential. Each word sounded like a negotiation disguised as mentorship. I scrolled through timestamps, midnight, 2 a.m., weekends. Her replies were instant. Mine, when I texted her those same hours, had gone unanswered for weeks. When she got home, I asked how work was. She said exhausting, that she might start staying late for mentoring sessions. I nodded, set my tools aside, and said nothing. That was the moment everything shut down inside me, not from anger, but precision. I could see the pattern forming. Influence in exchange for loyalty. Validation as currency. And I knew exactly where it led. Over the next days, intimacy vanished completely. No arguments, no rejection, just quiet withdrawal. She'd scroll Amazon on her phone, adding office decor to her card on my card, calling it team morale. I stopped checking. The silence between us became like static, a low hum that never stopped. The following Friday, she came home glowing from a team dinner, smelling like hotel lobby cologne and confidence. I didn't ask questions. I just watched, memorized the shift, the way she moved like she already belonged somewhere else. Later that night, when she fell asleep, I opened a new folder on my desktop labeled Optimization. Inside it, I started saving copies, bank statements, credit charges, emails. Not revenge, just architecture. Quiet, deliberate, untraceable structure. Because some systems don't need confrontation. They just need redesign. 3 weeks passed like clockwork running on dead batteries, still moving, but with no spark left. Megan's new routine became predictable. Morning workout, double espresso from Starbucks, conference calls bleeding into late dinners that weren't really dinners. She talked about leadership alignment the way I talked about circuit calibration, precise, technical, detached. But her precision wasn't about logic. It was about power. I didn't argue. I didn't accuse. I simply watched. Engineers solve problems by isolating variables, so I began isolating her behavior. Every calendar entry, every expense report, every sudden mentorship session conveniently overlapping with Richard Langford's schedule. She'd post on LinkedIn about navigating uncertainty with courage, tagging him beneath every motivational quote. It wasn't romance. It was networking dressed as devotion. I spent those nights in the garage, under the fluorescent light, working on a prototype I'd been designing for months, a fault detection system for industrial motors. Something that listened for irregularities, the faint signals before total failure. Fitting. The silence between us had that same vibration, a hum before collapse. When she finally noticed I'd stopped asking where she was, she grew cautious. She'd test my reactions, mentioning Richard's name casually, pretending indifference. But silence is an amplifier, and mine said everything. She began to fill the quiet with justifications. He's just guiding me through the transition. It's important for my career. I didn't disagree. I just took another sip of my coffee and made mental notes. By the end of the month, intimacy had vanished entirely. One night, as she scrolled her phone beside me, she turned away before the screen lit her face. I caught a glimpse of a message preview. Appreciate your trust. I didn't need to read the rest. I'd seen enough patterns in data logs to recognize repetition. The next morning, I left early. Drove my Chevy Silverado to work before sunrise, parked in the farthest corner of the lot, and sat there for a long time. I wasn't angry. Anger was noise. I needed clarity. Systems break down when feedback loops fail. Ours had failed long ago. I powered off my phone, deleted her access to my shared drives, and opened a new notebook. On the first page, I wrote one word in capital letters: exit. Sometimes optimization doesn't mean fixing the circuit. It means cutting power completely. The shift began quietly, like a low-frequency vibration only I could hear. Megan had grown comfortable with my silence, mistaking it for surrender. That was her first miscalculation. I'd spent 15 years designing systems that failed only when people ignored the warning signs. She was ignoring all of them. I started redirecting my attention the same way I redirected current in a circuit, away from her, toward a cleaner path. Each morning I left before she woke, claiming an early project deadline. In reality, I drive to a Waffle House off the interstate, the kind of place where no one asks questions. Same booth, same waitress, same order, black coffee and scrambled eggs. Routine was a stabilizer, and I needed that more than conversation. While she was out networking, I reviewed her digital trail. Receipts from Amazon deliveries labeled as office decor, shipped to her company address, but billed to our joint account. Hotel charges from a business trip that lasted one night longer than scheduled. Her name in company newsletters beside Richard's, both listed under Leadership Spotlight. Every detail fit perfectly into a pattern of optimization, hers, not ours. Still, I didn't confront her. Engineers don't interrupt data collection mid-test. I wanted to know how far she'd go before the system overheated. So I watched and waited. Then came the quarterly company gala. She spent hours choosing her dress, rehearsing small talk, and perfecting the story of her professional rise. She didn't invite me, said it was just for executives. Later that night, photos appeared online, her hand resting on Richard's arm, her smile a fraction too confident. The caption read, "Celebrating leadership and collaboration." I didn't feel jealousy. I felt confirmation. The next morning, she mentioned possibly transferring departments, said it might open new opportunities. I nodded, packed my briefcase, and left. That night, I opened the folder named Optimization again and added new files, screenshots, invoices, timestamps. Evidence not for revenge, but for precision. I had one rule in engineering: never announce a shutdown. Just pull the power quietly, let the silence explain everything. And that's exactly what I plan to do. 2 weeks after the gala, she began talking to me like a manager delivering bad news. Measured tone, careful phrasing, empathy rehearsed in front of a mirror. She said things like, "We've both grown in different directions, and I just need to focus on my goals right now." She never used the word marriage. To her, we were a brand that had lost market value. I listened without expression, the way I'd listen to a system hum before it failed. At work, my project was winding down. The company planned layoffs, and management whispered about budget cuts. Colleagues panicked. I didn't. Chaos never rattled me. It just clarified my next move. I'd already set a new course. Quietly, I began exporting design files, saving contacts, archiving years of work into a secure drive. Nothing illegal, just insurance. I'd learned that redundancy wasn't betrayal. It was survival. At home, the distance grew measurable. She stopped saying goodnight. I stopped pretending to sleep. Most evenings, I'd sit in the garage with the truck radio on low, reading job postings in other states. One listing stood out: systems optimization engineer for an aerospace manufacturer in Denver. Clean design, steady funding, no corporate theater. It felt like oxygen. When she left for another late strategy meeting, I filled out the application, attached my resume, and hit send. The confirmation email arrived at midnight. By morning, I'd already decided. If they called, I'd go. Days later, they did. The interview was scheduled for the following week, virtual first, then in person. I didn't mention it to her. I didn't mention anything at all. That Friday, she walked in carrying a new handbag, smiling faintly, as if nothing had fractured. I asked how her mentorship was going. She said inspiring. I said nothing. She didn't notice the change in my tone, or that my desk was already half empty. That night, I deleted our joint calendar and replaced it with a single entry: flight, Delta Airlines, Monday, 8:20 a.m. No confrontation, no goodbye speech, just a clean disconnection. In circuitry, it's called isolation. to protect what still works from what's already burned out. Monday came without ceremony. She was still asleep when I left, phone buzzing beside her pillow, the screen lighting up with a new message preview from Richard. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. I closed the bedroom door quietly, grabbed my suitcase, and stepped into the morning air. It was cool and still, the kind of silence that feels like permission. Driving to the airport in my Chevy Silverado felt like the cleanest breath I'd taken in years. The city faded behind me in the rearview mirror, replaced by open highway and the slow light of dawn. No music, no distractions, just the steady hum of the engine. At the gate, I watched the planes move like clockwork, precise and deliberate. My Delta Airlines ticket felt like a key. On the flight, I reviewed my notes for the interview, though my mind kept drifting to what I'd left behind. The quiet house, her untouched coffee mug, the unread text she'd eventually find when she realized my phone number was no longer active. I didn't block her. I just removed myself from her system. In Denver, the air was thinner, sharper. The interview was straightforward. They wanted an engineer who understood failure prevention, someone who could anticipate problems before they surfaced. I told them, that's what I do. They asked why I'd left my previous job. I said one word, optimization. The hiring manager smiled like he understood something deeper than the answer. By sunset, I had an offer. A clean start. I signed the contract that night from a hotel room overlooking the city. The quiet felt earned, not lonely. Back home, Megan texted late that night. She wrote, "We need to talk. I think I've made mistakes." The message came through on my old number linked to the tablet I hadn't yet wiped. I read it once, then closed the device. Mistakes were her language. Systems failure was mine. And this time, I wasn't going to repair it. The next morning, I bought a used apartment downtown, small but efficient. I unpacked one bag, one tool set, and my laptop. For the first time in years, every wire in my life connected cleanly, with no interference, no background noise, and no need for her signal. By the second week in Denver, the silence had become its own kind of rhythm. I woke before dawn, brewed coffee, and walked to the office while the city still slept. My new team worked with quiet precision. No politics, no performative meetings, just data and results. It was everything my life had stopped being years ago. I'd expected freedom to feel like escape, but it felt more like calibration. Each day, I fine-tuned the edges of my new routine, late-night coding, morning runs, breakfast at the same corner diner. It reminded me of that first morning at Waffle House, the way solitude could feel solid instead of empty. Back in Atlanta, Megan tried to reach me. Emails came first, short, polite, just checking in. Then longer ones, full of reflection and regret. She said Richard had misunderstood their connection, that she'd let ambition cloud perspective. Her phrasing was corporate, sanitized. I recognized the pattern, damage control, not remorse. I didn't reply. A week later, an envelope arrived forwarded from my old address. Inside were real estate documents. She'd listed our house for sale. I'd already anticipated it. Months earlier, I'd transferred my share quietly into a separate trust. Her name alone on the deed now meant responsibility, not ownership. She wouldn't realize that until the closing date. One night, I scrolled through LinkedIn out of habit. Her profile was still active, still filled with leadership quotes, though Richard's name was gone. The photo of her from the gala had been replaced by a headshot, professional, distant. She was building a narrative, turning failure into a lesson for an audience that didn't know her story. Meanwhile, I was building something real. My prototype, the one I'd worked on in the garage, had been approved for production. My manager said it would change the company's maintenance systems completely. He called it impressive. I called it efficient. That night, I sat by the window watching the city lights flicker like circuitry. I realized she had spent years chasing recognition, while I had spent years perfecting silence. And now, that silence had become my advantage. I didn't erase her from my life. I just left her behind in a system that could no longer process who I'd become. 2 months after moving to Denver, my life felt like it had finally reached equilibrium. I didn't think about Megan much anymore, until one night, her name appeared in my inbox again. The subject line read, "We need closure." I stared at it for a minute before opening it. Her words were careful, rehearsed. She said she wanted to talk face to face, that she missed the stability I brought. Stability, She made it sound like a product she'd misplaced. She mentioned she'd left the company. Apparently, Richard's mentorship had ended abruptly after an internal review. The tone of her message wasn't desperation. It was confusion, the kind that comes when power stops answering your calls. I didn't reply, but that message stayed in my head for days, like background noise you can't quite mute. Part of me wanted to see what had become of her, not out of longing, but curiosity. Engineers study outcomes. I wanted to see the result of her optimization. A week later, I got my chance. I was in Atlanta for a systems conference. After my final presentation, I stopped by the old neighborhood, more instinct than plan. The house looked smaller somehow, the yard unkempt, the porch light burned out. A for sale sign leaned crookedly against the mailbox. Through the window, I saw her sitting alone at the kitchen table, laptop open, phone beside her. She looked thinner, older, like someone who'd spent too long selling versions of herself that no one was buying anymore. I didn't knock. I just watched for a minute, then turned back toward the truck. Before I left, I sent one message from a new number. Some systems fail quietly. Some fail because they're built on the wrong foundation. Then I deleted the thread and drove away. That night, at the hotel, I finally slept without dreams. The next morning, as the plane lifted off back to Denver, I looked out over the city I'd once called home. I realized I hadn't run from her. I'd simply removed myself from a design that no longer worked. Optimization wasn't escape. It was evolution. Back in Denver, life kept moving in quiet precision. The project I joined had turned into a cornerstone of the company's new safety division. My designs were saving millions in potential failures, and for the first time, people noticed without me having to speak loudly. Recognition came in small nods, steady promotions, and trust, the kind that didn't need to be chased. One Friday evening, as I was closing my laptop, my manager mentioned the company was expanding overseas. They wanted me to lead the integration team. He said it was a major opportunity. I told him I'd think about it, but deep down, I already knew the answer. Some chances arrived too clean to ignore. That night, I stopped at a quiet diner on the edge of town. It reminded me of that first Waffle House, the smell of coffee and grease grounding me. A small TV in the corner played local news. My attention drifted until a familiar name caught my ear, Megan Langford. She'd married Richard, apparently. The segment was about a corporate ethics investigation involving misuse of funds. They'd both resigned. The news anchor moved on quickly, but my mind stayed there. It wasn't satisfaction I felt. It was symmetry. She had built her entire identity around visibility, and now, the spotlight had turned harsh. Meanwhile, I disappeared into quiet efficiency and found peace. I finished my meal, left cash on the table, and walked out into the cold night. My phone buzzed once, an email notification. It was from her again. No subject line, no body text. Just an empty message, like a signal sent into silence, waiting for an echo that would never come. I archived it without opening. Driving home, city lights blurred in the windshield. I thought about systems again, how some collapse dramatically, others just lose current until everything powers down. Ours had powered down long ago. By the time I pulled into my apartment, the email was already forgotten. I poured a drink, stood by the window, and watched Denver move below me. Every light was a pulse, steady, alive. I realized that for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I'd lost something. I felt like I'd finally stopped running diagnostics on a life that wasn't mine anymore. A few months later, Denver felt like home. My new apartment overlooked the rail lines, and every night I'd watch the trains pull in and out, precise and predictable. I liked that, the order of it. Systems that worked because someone, somewhere, cared about small details. That was how I'd started to think about life again, not as recovery, but as recalibration. One night, after a long shift, I stopped by a small bar near the plant. The bartender was friendly, the kind who didn't ask questions. A woman sat 2 seats away, typing on her laptop, earbuds in, lost in her own world. For a moment, I almost spoke, but then I didn't. I realized I wasn't ready to let anyone in. Not yet. Healing wasn't loud. It was maintenance done in silence. A week later, my manager called me into his office. The company wanted to feature me in a profile about innovation and leadership. He said it would be good for the brand. I almost laughed. I told him quietly that I preferred staying behind the data, not in front of it. He respected that. For the first time in years, I was being valued for what I built, not how I looked doing it. That weekend, I took a drive into the mountains. I parked the truck near a trailhead and sat for a long time, listening to the wind move through the pines. No notifications, no noise, just space. I thought about the man I'd been in Atlanta, always measured, always trying to fix a system that was never meant to be stable. Megan had chased recognition until it consumed her. I'd chosen silence until it rebuilt me. On the drive back, I passed a billboard for Delta Airlines, advertising new beginnings start with one flight. I almost smiled. For me, that had been true. A single decision, one quiet flight, and everything had realigned. When I got home, the night air smelled like rain and steel. I sat by the window, watching lightning in the distance, and realized something simple but final. She'd always needed an audience. I only ever needed peace. And I'd finally built a life that didn't depend on her applause. A year passed before I heard her name again. It came up in a message from an old colleague back in Atlanta. He said Megan had left the city, that the company had quietly removed her from every leadership archive. Apparently, she was consulting now, freelance work, new branding, same tone. Reinvention was her specialty. I didn't respond to the message. Some stories don't need sequels. By then, my life had shifted into something steadier. The aerospace division promoted me to lead engineer. I had a small team, bright, quiet people who solved problems instead of talking about them. Every day was simple. Design, test, refine, repeat. Evenings, I cooked dinner at home or walked through the city, watching the lights fade from the glass towers downtown. It wasn't exciting. It was peaceful. And peace, I'd learned, was underrated. One morning, on my way to work, I stopped at a small cafe near the plant. The waitress handed me coffee and smiled. She said I looked like someone who'd figured things out. I told her not quite, but I was getting closer. It was the first real conversation I'd had with a stranger in months, and it felt natural. No performance, no subtext, just connection. Later that day, during a systems review, one of the younger engineers asked how I handle failure. I told him quietly, "You don't fight failure. You design for it. You build systems that can survive the breakdowns." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't fully understand yet. It takes time to learn that lesson. That evening, I stopped by a diner, the same kind of place where everything had started. I sat alone, eating eggs and toast, watching the rain outside streak across the window. For a moment, I thought about the man who once lived by routine, by silence, by precision. The man who built his life around someone else's noise. He was gone now, replaced by something simpler. A man who'd learned that leaving isn't weakness, it's clarity. Some men rebuild by shouting. Others rebuild in silence, one quiet decision at a time. I finished my coffee, left a tip, and walked into the cool night air. The world hummed steady and clean around me. And for the first time in a long while, everything worked exactly as it should. Support the channel by liking, commenting, and subscribing. I promise even more interesting stories.